Hello, I'm back with David Weber today, answering questions from Facebook. And the question that I would like to start today is the sequel to In Fury Born. Are you planning on making one?
Well,
This was asked by several people.
yes, I'm sure it was. Actually, the first half of In Fury Born is the prequel to Path of the Fury, because people were asking me how they could get Path of the Fury in hardcover. And there was no way that Baen was going to go back and reissue it in a hardcover, unless maybe eventually they did it like they're doing the leather-bound reissues of the
Okay,
early on
right,
Harringtons.
right.
And there aren't enough books in that series to guarantee the kind of sales that would make that worthwhile. So I had always intended to do the prequel, which is how Alicia comes to join the cadre and everything else. And it occurred to me that if I did it and then we bound it into one cover as an expanded version of the original novel, that it would undoubtedly be released in hardcover, which would give people who wanted a hardcover copy of it a hardcover copy. And I was afraid to do it for years because I wrote the entire Path of the Fury in less than 1 month. I wrote it in about 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
And I had never had it. It's not anywhere near as long as my
Okay.
current books, okay? But it's still, I think, like 95,000 words, maybe even a little more. And I had never had a book come together that before. And I was afraid that if I went back to it, I wouldn't be able to match the pacing and the intensity of the original book. And that would be a real problem if this was the first half of the book. Okay. So it took me quite a while to work up the nerve to go back and do it. And when I finished, I think seriously that most people, if they didn't already know, wouldn't realize that the two parts of the book were written like 10 years apart. All right. Which was good.
Okay.
All right. Now, that was sort of by way of explanation, because there are at least 2 more books that I want to do in that series. I remember Path of the Fury had just come out, and I was at a science fiction convention in Lynchburg, Virginia, and Roger Zelazny was there. Z and W were sitting at the same table for signings. And I had signed every copy of my book in Virginia, and he was in a brief hiatus in signing his books, if you see what I'm saying. And he turned around to me and he said, "I finished reading Path of the Fury last night." I'm like, "Oh my God." So Roger Zelazny read my book. Oh shit. Okay. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I think it may be the best blend of science fiction and fantasy I've ever read." I mean, I was 10 feet tall. I was covered with hair. I mean, this was Roger Zelazny telling me that he liked my book. And that was the trip that my 78 Volvo swallowed the timing gears on. So I wound up being a house guest with Jane Lindskog for about 10 extra days because they had to de-mothball a manufacturing site in Sweden to make the parts needed and ship them across the Atlantic, I think. Anyway, so Roger was staying with Jane before,
Okay.
for the con too. And I remember it's an afternoon. Jane's house had been built before the Civil War. And by the way, Jane writes some good stuff. But anyway, the house had been built before the Civil War and had a tin roof. And there was a thunderstorm coming through. And Roger Zelazny and I are sitting on the back porch of her house with the rain pounding on this tin roof and coming in sheets off the edge of the back porch with our bare feet stuck out under the water.
Mm-hmm.
And we're drinking tea, I think. Might have been a beer, but I don't think it was. But we're sitting there and we're talking writing. And he's talking to me as if I had 20 books out or he only had 3. I mean, that's exactly the way that he was. I consider it to be one of the great privileges of my life that I actually got to know him as well as I did. But on the Path of the Fury front,
Mm-hmm.
So there are two books that I want to write. One would be maybe 4 or 5 years after the end of In Fury Born, when Alicia and Megara and Tisiphone are an established team. And a mission comes up where they need to infiltrate a bunch of drug runners. And by this time, we have discovered that, first of all, the telepathy the connection that Tisiphone establishes between Alicia and Megara. By the way, she's Alicia with malice aforethought, because the third Fury is Electo. Okay. Anyway, that the connection that she establishes is instantaneous. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they have never been able to establish a range limit to it, no matter how far separated they are. So while most Alpha Synth pilots have to stay within range for their headset, their implants, to keep them connected to their Alpha Synth partner, and you can't get far away for the time lag, the transmission lag, to become significant, because it starts making you both very uncomfortable and disoriented, kind of thing. Alicia could be halfway across the galaxy and still fine in terms of having her connection.
Okay.
So that means that she can infiltrate the group. Tisiphone can go with her to play games with computers and stuff for her and help her get information out of people, with no Alpha Synth anywhere in evidence while she does it. So the game plan for this mission is that O Branch has managed to find an outfit that's recruiting mercenaries who they think are working for the druggers, and the drug in question is I think I called it Dreamy White in the book, but it's the drug that's in its most effective form is extracted from actual human brains with fatal results for the humans involved.
Okay. And
this is the naturally produced version, and there's a lot of it. So they know somebody's killing a lot of people to get this. So Alicia infiltrates the mercenary group, and Megara is supposed to follow the ship that she's on when it wormholes out, so that they can find out where this is all going. Well, unfortunately, two ships get underway at the same time, and this is not directional. The link isn't. Okay? You can't tell a thing about the direction it's coming from. And Megara and Ferhat bin Belkacem, who is aboard, follow the wrong ship. And they don't realize they're following the wrong ship until, even though the transmission is instantaneous, there's a Doppler effect if you're moving at different velocities. And they realize that the Doppler effect they're getting doesn't match the ship they're following. But they can't change course in time to get onto the tail. So Alicia winds up on the planet where all this is going on, and they have no idea where it is. And she and Megara, look, there's a sky, but they can't really take observations. Right. So she's working from the inside, trying to deal with the conspiracy on this planet, pretty much all by herself. I mean, there's no support team. And meanwhile, Ferhat and Megara are trying frantically to figure out where the hell she is so they can call in the Marines. And in the course of all this, among other things, Alicia gets a boyfriend. And he's pretty bad news, too. He was a member of the military forces on this planet before the bad guys moved in. And he's actually been trying to put together a guerrilla movement. And he tries real hard to kill her the first time they meet, because I thought she's a mercenary working for the other side.
Well, that should work out great.
Yeah, it's a match made in heaven. So that's one of the ones I want to do. The other one that I want to do is young Ferhat bin Belkacem, straight out of the Justice Academy, convinced that every I must be dotted, every T must be crossed. The only way you can get good law enforcement is to follow the law and procedure. And he's on the equivalent of his midshipman cruise from the Justice Academy, and he's assigned to this team, which stumbles across a really, really nasty problem, and they find out they did when every other member of the team gets dead. And so he's on the run, and he's got the credentials of this chief inspector, not O Branch, but a chief inspector. that have sort of, and so he's frantically trying, number one, to stay alive, and number two, to solve the problem. And along the way, he like runs into this retired justice sergeant, this old, naughty, non-com kind of guy. He kind of looks at him like this, kind of thing. But no, I'm a senior chief inspector. Sure you are, sir. No, I've got the credentials.
Because he's using somebody else's credentials.
Sure you are, So the sergeant's like, okay, fine, I can take a joke. So he kind of tags along, and he just watches this kid getting in deeper and deeper. And yet he's still, he's got his nose above water, and they're gradually unraveling what's going on. And finally, he realizes, Fairhat does, that he needs more firepower than he's got, and there's no way he can contact the Empire. So he decides to hire a bunch of mercenaries. And this is where he meets Simon Monkoto, the mercenary from Path of the Fury. And using his senior chief inspector's credentials, he hires Monkoto to shoot the problem, which Monkoto does, taking losses along the way. At the end of it, here is Fairhat bin Belqasem on the bridge of Monkoto's flagship, having to explain to him that I'm not really a senior chief inspector, but I will do my best to see to it that you get paid. I just can't promise that you will. And I won't tell you what happens after that.
So you're looking at a sequel and a prequel. Okay.